You don't see a horse in the opening of Red Dead Redemption. You're introduced to a world of smoke, newspapers, cars, streetlights and parasols before being shown the sun-scorched landscape speckled with parched wilderness that we traditionally recognize as the Wild West. The outlaw protagonist John Marston is presented to us as a man out of time, lost in a rapidly modernizing world. This opening is a masterclass in establishing a historical environment. This is how historian and writer Holly Nielsen described Red Dead Redemption in a piece for The Telegraph back in 2016, and it's stuck with me ever since. Historical games, like other media, may have several inaccuracies, as minor as small anachronistic items, or as major as misrepresentations of entire populations' demographics. But one thing that games like Red Dead Redemption are masterful at is establishing their atmosphere and environment. While the game's 2018 prequel may have blown away the rest of the medium with its attention to detail, it wouldn't have done so without the rich world and detail of the original game, and its deep historical connections evident throughout each mission, character, and line of dialogue. Once again, I'd like to consider each of these details and the historical events that may have inspired them. So let's take a look at the real history of Red Dead Redemption. This video is brought to you by the Real Pixels Patreon. If you enjoy these videos and are interested in seeing more of them made, you can head over to patreon.com/realpixels to support the channel for as little as $1 per month. There are several tiers with different benefits too, including audio commentaries for every video, monthly posts with additional insight, early access to videos, discounts for merch, your name or photo in the credits, and bonus videos like my recent gameplay of Red Dead Redemption 2 GeoGuessr, or my experience revisiting the first game's multiplayer. That you ever even considered watching my videos already means more than you could know, but if you're interested in and able to offer more support and receive a few benefits in return, you can do so at patreon.com/realpixels. Or at the very least, head over to the website to browse other creators, because there are so many talented people offering so many incredible benefits that you might be interested in. The game's opening shot shows a steamboat, which is unsurprising considering their prevalence in the prequel set 12 years earlier. Steamboats had operated in the United States since the 1780s, and by the 1800s, the country's rivers were crowded with them. On the docks in Blackwater is a crane offloading a car. Cranes and similar lifting devices have been around for millennia, dating back to the ancient Romans, Greeks, and Egyptians, and even as far back as ancient Mesopotamia around 3000 BC. Modern cargo loading harbour cranes became more prevalent around and after the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. The car it is carrying, meanwhile, appears to be modelled on the 1910 Ford Model T. The first production Model T was built in August 1908 and sold for about $850, equivalent to almost $30,000 today. There would have been roughly 15,000 to 30,000 of these models produced by this time. Production numbers increased significantly each year, peaking at over 2 million in 1923. It's said that the 10 millionth model was made in 1924 and the 15 millionth in 1927, witnessed by Henry Ford himself.
Extra, extra, read all about...
This is a well-known shout, thought to have originated around the mid-19th century in the United States. It originally referred to newspaper extras, which were special additional issues outside of standard publishing schedules to report on breaking news. Their urgency was eventually usurped by radio news, but they still existed for some time, and the shout itself has lived on in media.
My daddy settled this land, and I know he'll be looking down on us, pleased at how we help the natives.
Yes, they've lost their land, but they've gained access to heaven.
This is essentially the concept of manifest destiny, that Americans were destined to settle North America, to expand westward, to spread civilization and democracy. Those opposed to this concept, it's said, are considered to be misguided, if not depraved and traitorous. It was essentially this belief that led to the annexation of Texas in 1845, which itself led to the Mexican-American War, which saw an estimated tens of thousands of deaths. Ulysses S. Grant, who served in the war, later called it one of the most unjust ever waged by a stronger against a weaker nation. As the women imply, it also led to the forced removal of Native Americans from their lands, as settlers believed they were destined to own it themselves. And of course it led to massacres, including thousands, possibly over 100,000, in California, which many have since classified as genocide. The term manifest destiny, used explicitly a little later in the game, is still occasionally used today, as some Americans believe they are destined to expand the United States by annexing or invading other nations, or even planets, though it seems the majority of American citizens are perhaps not quite so enthusiastic.
Apparently people can fly. Didn't you hear? Out in Kansas, a man even got a car to fly.
This could be a reference to several pieces of media, like Ian Fleming's 1964 novel Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, later a 1968 film by Ken Hughes, which is set in 1910s England and features a story with a flying car. A little closer to the game's history, it could be a reference to short films by Walter R. Booth, like The Question Mark Motorist from 1906 or its 1911 remake, The Automatic Motorist. As for the achievement of flight itself, the first powered airplane flight took place in 1903. It's largely accepted that it was the Wright brothers who achieved it, though there are some competing claims.
Apparently, Mr. Johns wants to run for governor.
Fittingly, 7 US states held gubernatorial elections in 1911, and only 2 in the West. New Mexico on November 7th and Arizona on November 12th, so both quite late in the year. The Democratic Party won both, with over 51% of the votes. Both were the state's first elections, with both governors being sworn in when the states were admitted to the Union in 1912, so a little later than is implied in the game.
Apparently, the Johns family have made a lot of money.
Interestingly, the 2 leading candidates in the 1911 Arizona gubernatorial election were seemingly opposites in regards to money. George W.P. Hunt, who called himself the Old Walrus, had a family who were desperately poor, having lost their fortunes after the Civil War. He ran away from home at the age of 18. For 3 years, his family thought he had been killed. He ultimately won the election, as well as 6 more non-consecutive elections in the 20 years that followed. Meanwhile, his opponent, Edward W. Wells, was a businessman as well as a politician, apparently known as Arizona's first millionaire, though it seems he's not the only one.
His family is nothing but hillbilly trash.
This is, of course, a derogatory term, typically for residents of the Appalachians or Ozarks. Hillbilly is commonly said to have originated in Scotland, brought to America by early Ulster immigrants, hill referring to hill folk isolated from communities, and billy meaning fellow, companion, comrade, or perhaps a reference to Billy Boys, the followers of King William III of England. However, this origin has been denied by many, as its first use in the US seemingly suggests a later development, but perfectly accurate here nonetheless.
What you must remember, my dear, is that we have been brought here to spread the word.
Christian missions, that is, organized efforts to spread Christianity, have existed practically as long as the religion itself. It was and is worldwide. In fact, in 1911, when the game is set, the American organization Christian and Missionary Alliance entered Cambodia and Vietnam.
And the word and civilization, they are the same thing. They are the gifts.
Religion, particularly Christianity, has long been synonymous with civilization and colonialism, including in histories of the Americas. This was often reflected in the cultural assimilation of Native Americans. Some of the earliest boarding schools were established by Christian missionaries, and they considered it essential to convert Native Americans to Christianity, outlawing their own traditional religious ceremonies. As Salish Indian writer Claywoman writes, they felt that Christianity was the only religion with which to attain salvation, so to believe in any other religion was paganism. To better get the Indian to assimilate, they needed to persuade the children the old religion of their forefathers and mothers was pagan and wrong. As a result, the children were often given Anglo-European names and forced to cut their hair.
It is the opportunity we have, the chance to live among people who are decent and who do not kill each other.
Along these lines, there's a social movement, particularly prevalent around the turn of the century, especially the 1890s to 1920s, called the Social Gospel, which seeks to address social problems using Christian ethics, targeting problems like alcoholism, crime, poverty, and inequality. After John reaches his destination, he meets Jake in the saloon, walking through the classic swinging doors to do so. Interestingly, despite their prevalence in westerns, these doors were not present on all saloons at the time. In fact, perhaps most didn't have them. They were more common in warmer climates and are often depicted even smaller in media than they were in real life, perhaps to make the heroes appear even larger. Towns and cities with colder weather had regular wooden doors to maintain the heat.
Take it easy until we're out of town. Ain't no point in causing a ruckus.
The word ruckus is attested in at least 1890, preceded by variants dating back to 1872, so certainly accurate here. Interestingly, when a Missouri senator used it in 1914, New York newspaper editors were confused. They knew rumpus, rampage, and rambunctious, but not ruckus. As North Dakota's Daily Tribune clarified though, the confusion was clearly geographic. They called it a word in perfectly good standing almost anywhere west of the Ohio.
So it's Fort Mercy you want to visit?
That's right.
Interestingly, Fort Mercer was also the name of a military fort in New Jersey, built during the Revolutionary War in 1777 on the east bank of the Delaware River and designed to be defended by 1,500 men. It was named after General Hugh Mercer, who was killed in the Battle of Princeton at the beginning of the year. It was the scene of the Battle of Red Bank, also known as the Battle of Fort Mercer, in October 1777, which resulted in American victory.
Folks say it was built during the Mexican War.
A similar military post is Fort Brown, built as Fort Texas in 1846 on the US-Mexico border. It was besieged that May, resulting in the death of Commander Jacob Brown. The fort was subsequently renamed in his honor, and it's where the city of Brownsville got its name. Fort Brown was held by both the Confederate and Union armies during the Civil War at different times. It continued to be used at several points over the years to come before being decommissioned in 1946.
I heard they had to go up north to fight Indians.
This is unsurprising. There were, of course, several conflicts with Native Americans in the late 19th century after the Mexican-American War. While not quite up north, many of these involved the army forces who were on the border. For example, there was a series of conflicts between Texas settlers and Southern Plains Indians. These saw significant declines in native populations, including as a result of disease. According to one estimate, at least 30 major epidemics wiped out more than 75% of Texas Indians, including the extinction of several tribes. After John is shot, he is saved by a woman named Bonnie McFarlane, who uses her own funds to do so.
It cost us $15.
That's equivalent to a little over $500 today. A little later, Bonnie shows John around the ranch.
To your right is the general store. You won't find Parisian high fashion, but it's good for the essentials.
That she mentions Paris is unsurprising. France has long been associated with high fashion, hence the term haute couture, referring to high dressmaking or sewing. The term is protected by law. Only certain companies can use the label each year. High fashion in France dates to at least the 19th century, by men and women. 18th century France saw a dramatic rise in clothing consumption, resulting in a clothing revolution later in the century. In the 20th century, the Nazis, having occupied Europe, sought to make Berlin or Vienna the center of European couture, but the country resisted, the president of the governing body of French fashion famously saying, "You can impose anything on us by force," but Parisian haute couture will not budge either as a whole or bit by bit. It is in Paris, or it is nowhere.
I don't think I've ever seen a ranch with its own store before.
He wouldn't be the only one. Further northeast in Red Dead Redemption 2's Emerald Ranch, it appears there was a general store, but it was no longer in operation by the time John was there, and they weren't particularly common at other ranches either, though there were exceptions. King Ranch in Texas is the largest ranch in the US, bigger than the states of Delaware and Rhode Island, and larger than several countries like Luxembourg and Samoa. It was built in 1852, and its commissary was built 4 years later. Elsewhere in Texas is the Wagoner Ranch, the largest in the US within a single fence. It was established in 1849, and its commissary was built around the 1870s. The ranch itself went up for sale in 2015 for $725 million.
That's the train station.
McFarlane's ranch wouldn't have been the only ranch with its own nearby train station, though again it wasn't exactly an expectation. Around the turn of the 20th century, the growth of King Ranch led to conversations around introducing a railroad. A town site was established 3 miles east of the ranch's headquarters, named Kingsville after the ranch's founder, Richard King, and in 1904 it saw its first passenger train, followed by a post office. The railroad was the city's primary source of income, bringing in new residents. By 1912, the population was around 4,000. Wagoner Ranch, meanwhile, had 3 nearby railroads to help sustain its population of around 60,000 cattle, removing the need for annual long drives along the Western Trail. Near the train station at McFarland's Ranch is an American flag. Upon closer inspection, it becomes clear that this is not the modern-day flag, as it has only 46 stars, rather than the current 50. This is, of course, accurate. There were 46 states by 1911, the latest being Oklahoma, admitted in 1907. 4 states were admitted later, New Mexico and Arizona the next year in 1912, and Alaska and Hawaii almost 50 years later in 1959.
Maybe you should move to a big city, become a lady of leisure.
This term, of course, refers to a woman who does not need to earn a living. There was an argument in decades around this that modern housewives were ladies of leisure, but evidence suggests that the term would perhaps have been misapplied. In fact, housewives worked long hours in this time. A 1929 survey of more than 2,000 homemakers in the US found that more than 84% worked over 42 hours a week, more than 50% worked over 48 hours, and a third worked over 56 hours. That being said, there were obviously some ladies of leisure, especially in upper-class families and communities. The term was especially appropriate for some British families and royalty, where their activities often revolved around religion or creative hobbies, such as reading or music. If John takes a closer look around McFarland's Ranch, or many other locations in the world, he can find several different products and promotions, like B.J. Edwards Gelatin, A.D. Dunbar & Sons Sugar, Jolly Jack's Chewing Tobacco, and J.J. McClure Fortifying Hair Tonic. In real life, there were and are several similar companies and brands, like E.S. Burnham Company's Hasty Jellicon, Abraham Lyle & Sons Sugar, Bootjack Plug Tobacco, and Maguire's Hair Tonic. The game also has some historically interesting products too, like a neutralizing cordial, not the concentrated syrup drink, but the drink or food with medicinal qualities, some of which may have eventually become the non-medicinal fruit drink, and Buck Dingle's Skin Salve, of which many similar products were advertised as cure-alls or for beauty purposes, or as methods to cure minor skin irritations, from bruises to cuts to burns. In the next mission with Bonnie, she challenges John to a horse race.
I hate to take money from a lady, miss.
Unsurprisingly, horse racing is a very old sport, believed to have occurred in ancient Babylon, Egypt, and Syria. The 4-horse chariot race was introduced to the ancient Olympic Games as early as 680 BC. Many centuries later, horse racing, the sport of kings, became well established in Britain. The Newmarket Racecourse was founded in 1636. Within 30 years, it became England's centre of racing thanks to the patronage of Charles II. The Epsom Derby followed over a century later, in 1780.
You're looking much better, considering you were almost buzzard food a couple days ago.
Buzzard is the common name of several different birds of prey species, including many in North America. In the US, like in Texas for instance, buzzard is the colloquial name given to the turkey vulture, based on the observations of early settlers, which may be what Bonnie is referring to.
I just know there are 2 theories to arguing with women, and neither one works.
Dutch says a very similar thing many years earlier, in Red Dead Redemption 2. It's a quote often attributed to American performer and humorist Will Rogers. Though perhaps not as famous as he later became, Rogers was alive and working at the time John says this here, in his early 30s.
I'm not even going to dignify that gibberish with a response.
The word gibberish was published at least as far back as the 16th century, so obviously historically accurate here. A 1755 dictionary suggested that the term was derived from the jargon of Jabir ibn Hayyan, the purported author of several Arabic works around the 9th to 10th centuries, though this theory was scrapped by the 1810s. There are 2 more likely origins, from jib, the Anglo-Romany variant of the Romany word meaning language or tongue, or simply onomatopoeia imitating speech, like the word gibber.
I have a small holding up in Great Plains.
A farmer? Yeah, and I'm the Queen of England.
A rare miss for Rockstar. As far as research suggests, Bonnie is not actually the Queen of England. In fact, there hadn't technically been someone with the title Queen of England since Anne in 1707, thanks to the Acts of Union. The modern title would be Queen of the United Kingdom, and there was a recent one by this stage. Victoria had died about 10 years earlier. The current Queen of the United Kingdom at this time was the Queen Consort, Mary of Teck, the husband of George V. She was later Queen Mother to their sons Edward VIII and, after Edward's abdication, George VI, and died about a year into the reign of the next queen, Elizabeth II. Bonnie is, of course, being sarcastic, using a phrase that has been around for quite some time, a way to emphasize the illegitimacy of the preceding information. There are several alternatives to her use of Queen of England too, like Queen of Sheba, Cleopatra, and King of Siam.
Uncle. Well, he's not my uncle. Just an old dog who's as lazy as a lizard on a hot day.
Not so historical, but that this is a phrase is unsurprising. To some, lizards may have a reputation for being lazy, but there's a reason for it. They generally don't generate enough heat to stay warm, instead relying on their environment for warmth. Sunbathing is the quickest way to achieve this. So hot days in particular are more of a reason for lizards to sunbathe, hence the idea that they might be lazy. No such excuse for Uncle, unfortunately.
We'll be lucky if our ranch survives another 5 years. Businessmen are the new cowboys.
This is a reference to the country's changing social texture, where the myth of the masculine individualistic cowboy was being replaced by the interests of big businesses and the federal government. As Sarah Humphreys writes, this political landscape is somewhat reminiscent of the late 19th century class struggles in Johnson County, Wyoming, particularly the range war that occurred in the 1880s and 90s, wherein large cattle companies ruthlessly persecuted who they called rustlers, many of whom were simply smaller competing settlers. Small farmers and ranchers formed a posse of approximately 200 men, leading to a standoff that was mostly stopped after President Benjamin Harrison called in the US cavalry. Around 20 to 40 people were killed during the overall conflict.
So this is Armadillo. Manhattan it is not, but it does okay for us.
Comparing one's town or city to Manhattan as an indicator of size or luxury is unsurprising. In 1910, Manhattan had a population of around 2.3 million people, more than most entire states at the time, all but 13. New York City overall, of which Manhattan is a borough, had more than twice the population of the next populous city, Chicago. The New York City subway opened in 1904, bringing the city together and really propelling it into the future in a way. It was soon to become the most populous city in the world in 1925, overtaking London, England. As for Armadillo itself, some believe the name is based on Amarillo, Texas, founded as a town in 1887 and incorporated as a city in 1899. It was named after the nearby creek and lake, which themselves likely were named for the yellow soil or wildflowers. Armadillo is yellow in Spanish. The town of Armadillo is likely just based on stereotypical Old West boom towns, like a smaller version of Tombstone, Arizona, or El Paso, Texas. It's something one might expect to see in a Western movie, like Bonanza City, New Mexico, once a mining town, now a ghost town, often used for filming. In the next mission, John meets Armadillo's marshal, but not before an encounter with one of his deputies.
You getting cute with me, boy?
The word cute is the emphatic form of acute, meaning keenly perceptive. In the 1700s, a cute remark referred to one that was quick-witted. This is likely where being cute with me came from, referring to being clever or sharp, but ironically, implying impertinence. It was in the 1800s that American students started using cute in reference to physical attractiveness.
Can you help me? He's outside my jurisdiction. He's in the next county.
If he's a US Marshal, as his badge suggests, this would be wrong. They are federally employed, meaning they technically have jurisdiction everywhere. However, the game's promotional material and newspaper describe him as a town marshal. In this case, he's right. Town marshals had duties akin to police chiefs, policing within certain borders of their communities. Considering the lack of policing in the area surrounding Armadillo though, it's unsurprising that Marshal Johnson occasionally heads out there to help or chase others.
I got the railway, the people who pay my salary.
The opening of railroads regularly influenced the operations of towns and prompted their establishment, such as Abilene, Kansas, one of the state's first railroad cow towns. Elsewhere, the Kansas Pacific Railroad, choosing to support Hays City and build a railroad there, ultimately led businesses and residents away from the nearby settlement of Rome. Some railway companies required police too. One of the earliest known railroad police forces was established by the chief engineer of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad in 1849. As for the marshal's salary, it could vary greatly, sometimes $50 to $150 per month, sometimes $200 per year. though it was largely assisted by additional revenue, such as a percentage of fines, licenses, and taxes, which had the potential to be somewhat lucrative in towns and cities with mines, and of course, railroads.
The railway, the people who pay my salary trying to get me to turn a blind eye to them burning down settlements up there.
They may not be entirely related, but there were conflicts regarding land titles and railway companies around this time, like the Muscle Slough tragedy. The history is a little more complex, but many settlers refused to leave land that was legally owned by the Southern Pacific Railroad in California, which led to a shootout in which 7 people were killed. Press reports and dramatizations emphasized the anti-railroad sentiment and gave support to the interpretation that the companies were greedy, corrupt men demonstrating greed and heartlessness. There was also the Colfax County War, wherein new owners bought land in Colfax County, New Mexico, formed the Maxwell Land Grant and Railway Company, and tried to remove settlers from the land, which led to conflict, and up to an estimated 200 men were killed. After meeting the marshal, John agrees to help him.
So who are we looking for?
A bunch of two-bit hoodlums.
2-bit came up in Red Dead Redemption 2, and was as accurate in that game as it is in this one. The word hoodlum, meanwhile, seemingly first originated from a group of young thieves in San Francisco who called themselves the Hoodlum Band. The term continued to be used in the city in the early 1870s, especially for those who attacked others, including largely violence against Chinese residents. By the mid to late 1870s, the word had spread elsewhere. When an anti-Chinese bill was passed by the Senate in 1879, the New York Times attributed its demand to the hoodlum sentiment of the Pacific Coast. When the Marshal and John use a similar term earlier then,
Got a bunch of hoods over in the saloon.
this is almost certainly an abbreviation of hoodlum, apparently first published around 1930, but not an impossible colloquialism in the decades before it. These aren't the only interesting terms used by the Marshal in this mission.
Goddamn road agents who prey on the stages coming in and out of town.
Road agent was another name for a highwayman in the 19th century, a highwayman being one who robbed from travelers, especially on horseback.
There's the dumb rat bastard now.
Interestingly, the first published instance of this term is in 1939, though its casual use suggests it had been introduced sometime earlier, as is common with colloquial terms whose usage likely precedes their first publication.
Mount up, Marston. Walton's our man.
Walton's gang could be a reference to the Dalton Gang, or Dalton Brothers, who specialized in bank and train robberies in the early 1890s. There are around 10 known named members of Walton's gang in the game, while the Dalton Gang had 9 known members. The real life group came to an end after the failed Coffeyville robbery in 1892, which saw several of its members killed.
Hello? Hello?
In the next mission with the Marshal, he is attempting to use a telephone. Though the telephone had been invented many decades earlier, as had long-distance telephone calls, it's not surprising that there were still some troubles at this point. Several advancements were still being made. The first transcontinental telephone call, 5,500 kilometers or 3,400 miles from New York City to San Francisco, took place a few years later in 1915, following tests in 1914. The first transatlantic call, from New York to London, took place in January 1927, following experiments in 1926 and a one-way transmission in 1923. In terms of numbers though, there were around 2 million telephones by the turn of the century, up from 230 in 1877 and over 60,000 in 1881.
It's Armadillo 731.
This is the Marshal identifying his number. If he's talking to the operator, it may have been redundant for him to specify Armadillo, or even the number, as they would have known where he's calling from. But he's having trouble, so it's logical for the character to be saying it anyway. As far as phone numbers go, they generally started with simply names. The operator would know the corresponding name of each jack on the board. In 1872, Massachusetts doctor Moses Greeley Parker was concerned about the ongoing measles epidemic impacting the city of Lowell's 4 telephone operators, which would have brought the service to a halt. As a result, numbers were used instead, and this trend continued. Eventually, numbers replaced operators altogether, but not always and not everywhere. A later system, developed in 1917, had each number made up of the first 3 letters of the office name followed by 4 digits. This was often in larger cities. Some systems used fewer letters or more numbers, especially later. For example, a phone number in the sitcom I Love Lucy was Murray Hill 59975. Which would have converted to 6859975. In the 1940s, a nationwide number plan was conceived, dividing the country into area codes. It soon became apparent that this system would be outgrown in less than 20 years. In the late 1950s then came all-number calling. The switchboard operators on the other end of the line were originally boys, but they earned a reputation for their rude, abusive nature, to each other and to customers. They were replaced with women. By 1910, New York Telephone had 6,000 women on its switchboards.
It's a new line. Hello? Hello?
It's said that Thomas Edison popularized the use of hello to answer the phone, replacing alternatives such as Alexander Graham Bell's ahoy, borrowed from ships, and others like are you there or are you ready to talk. Edison's connection to the word isn't unique. Hello was apparently the first word he yelled into the mouthpiece of the strip phonograph in 1877.
I remember when we first got here. We used to consider people from Dade County to be exotic.
There are actually at least 3 Dade counties in the US. One in Florida, founded in 1836, Georgia in 1837, and Missouri in 1841. All were named after Francis L. Dade, who was killed in 1835 in what is known as the Dade Battle or Dade Massacre.
Now guys can get here from the Midwest, and they can do it in 6 days.
If this comment is in relation to Dade County, then Missouri is likely the one he is referring to.
I don't understand it no more, boy. Honest goodness.
This is, of course, an alternative form of honest to God. It apparently originated in the US, first published in at least 1891, so logical here.
I think I seen me a couple of them rustlers. I think it was the Ballard twins.
The Bollard twins are possibly inspired by a group of loosely associated outlaws in late 19th century Arizona, sometimes called the Cochise County Cowboys, the Clanton Gang, or simply the Cowboys. They were said to have consisted of up to 300 members, and like the Bollard twins, were known for cattle rustling. Notable members included brothers Ike and Billy Clanton. In the game, meanwhile, the Bollard twins are led by brothers Ike and Willie Bollard. The Clanton brothers were both present at the famous gunfight at the OK Corral, where Billy was killed. On the right to the rustlers, one of the deputies has some words for John.
Bill Williamson folded you up like an empty purse the last time.
There are several common alternatives to this phrase, replacing empty purse with other cheap items, which were all first published many decades after the game. For instance, cheap tent in 1987, cheap suitcase in 1988, and cheap suit in 1990. But it's not impossible for it to have been spoken earlier.
What does a flannel-mouthed city boy?
The term flannel-mouthed was first published in 1911, so exactly the same time as the game, though it almost certainly originated sometime earlier. As the marshal intends, it's used disapprovingly, implying that someone is a braggart or empty talker. It was also apparently used in the US to describe Irishmen in at least 1893, as well as, interestingly, the name of a North American fish recognizable due to its large lower lips.
If we can take them alive, good. If not, smoke the sons of bitches.
The word smoke in reference to shooting someone with a firearm was seemingly first published in 1926, though it likely originated much earlier, as does Jonah's reply.
Music to my ears, Marshal.
This dates to at least the 16th century, including in one of William Shakespeare's earliest plays, the Comedy of Errors. The time was once when thou, unurged, wouldst vow that never words were music to thine ear. And while Shakespeare may be more interested in whether words shall be music to one's ears, whether or not the musical work of Bill Elm and Woody Jackson is music to one's ears is simply undeniable. Obviously, Rockstar Games proved its attention to detail to an insane level with Red Dead Redemption 2, so one would be forgiven for suspecting that such detail would be absent in the original game, released 8 years earlier. And to an extent, they'd be right, but Rockstar has been showing off its talent for quite some time, and Red Dead Redemption is no exception, allowing interesting connections to real-life history in every single mission. But the story has only just begun, and as has become customary by now, there are still several locations to discover, many more characters to meet, and plenty of history to uncover.